Hello there. Thank you for tuning in to the Everyman Tales. I am Everyman and I'll be your storyteller today. The story you're going to hear today is intended for daytime, nighttime, bedtime, adventures, road trips, any age group, and every imagination. Get ready to engage that imagination. Get ready for the next Everyman Tale. Tanya was standing there on the hillside, eating her dinner, watching the sunset. It was a beautiful evening. Like most evenings this time of year, the sun was setting, the dew was beginning to fall, and it made the grass she was chewing on absolutely delicious. She was walking with her family, of course, and her herd through the field of the hidden valley. She had made her way through the woods and up the paved road behind the houses where the dogs would come after them sometimes, and now they were gazing at the sun setting and enjoying their evening walk. Across the valley and up the other hillside, she saw one of the males, a buck, a young one, with horns that formed into 2 points on each side. He was alone, but he seemed to be keeping a watchful eye on the herd. Between them was a creek, another field, and several fences. Now, to some animals, those fences would be a bit of an obstacle, but to Tanya and her herd, these fences were no obstacles. A mere leap, just a little clench of the legs and the muscles in their hips, and they were over fences of that height with no problem at all. The trees that would have fruits and nuts and sprouts and buds come spring hanging on them could be reached by simply standing tall on their back legs and balancing perfectly, a relatively easy feat for Tanya and her deer family. As they were coming up the road, they had seen several other animals. One of the local foxes was trying to make his way into a hen house, and a local groundhog was across the creek scurrying under a cave. In the sky earlier, they had seen a hawk as well as a bald eagle, and Tanya was sure that after the sunset, one of the local black and white striped skunks would come out to play. Tanya made her way up the valley with her herd at about this same time every night. Behind her, she heard the warning sounds of one of the deer. She turned her head and saw that several of the deer had raised their tails in warning. She couldn't see what the problem was, but instantly, the deer that had their tails up started running full speed toward the top of the hill. Tanya didn't know what was happening, but she knew the signal, and she had been trained since her birth exactly what to do. She started sprinting upwards towards the hill, not knowing the danger that was behind her. Her beautiful evening, watching the sunset, had turned into a flight from an unknown terror. Then she heard it. The unmistakable bark of one of the local dogs who had inadvertently escaped from his pen and was chasing them through the field. Tanya had been chased by this dog before. He was very large and very angry, but not nearly as fast as her herd of deer. They sprinted towards the field. In an instant, they were over every fence. They dodged every tree, up over the top of the bluff, down the other side, and before they knew it, none of their herd could hear the dog barking anymore. Tanya had had experiences like this multiple times in the past, and this time, although she was slightly out of breath along with the rest of the herd, they eventually slowed down and spread out on the other side of the bluff in the field further up the hidden valley. They were now in the area surrounded by nothing but field and farmland. There were some old homesteads close by on the road that went through the middle of the valley, but none were inhabited, and they knew they didn't have to worry about anyone on foot. Tanya looked further up the hidden valley, and as the sun set behind the hill and the darkness began to fall, she realized there were multiple herds of deer in this valley, not just her own. Having been born several months earlier, Tanya had lost her spots like all deer do, and now was beginning to fill out into her full adult form. And she was learning her herd was not the only herd of deer. She could see from where she was 2 other groups, both with male deer off by themselves, keeping a watchful eye for dogs humans, and any type of threat. Tanya knew from instinct and had been trained by her creator to stay close to the tree line at this point, having recently been chased by the dog, so her herd made their way along the edge of the field and eventually up into the woods where they would bed down for the night. The sun set, the darkness began to blanket the hidden valley, and all the deer made their way into the woods. Some of the younger deer stayed in the field to play and butt heads and be silly and goofy for a bit, but they too eventually made their way into the woods. Far off in the distance, Tanya could hear their main threat. They were the coyotes. They were making the screaming noises. She could barely hear them, which meant they were nowhere near her herd and not an immediate threat, but they were far more of a danger than a chasing dog or a walking human would be. And for now, in the safety of the herd, walking through the woods, she knew that in the hidden valley, they were perfectly safe. The hidden valley had been home to Tanya's mother and father and their mother and father before them. And she trusted one day would be the home for her fawns as well. All of a sudden, the herd stopped and froze. They heard a slow rumble coming up the valley. She knew that if they were just still in the woods, that the color of their coat, which by no coincidence matched exactly the color of the tree bark and the dead leaves, would render them almost invisible. A car rumbled through the valley, driving slowly up the road, its windows down, the inhabitants looking at each side of the valley, counting apparently exactly how many deer they were able to see. They would slow down and count one side. Then they would drive a little quicker and count the other side. Eventually, they made their way all the way up the valley and out of sight. The deer began to march their way through the woods again, some coming back out into the field, although the sun had gone down and it was beginning to get dark. Then they heard the rumble again, and they froze. Again, the same car drove back down the valley, this time at a little bit quicker pace. It happened almost every evening at this time, and it was one of Tanya's favorite things to see. She had no idea what was happening, but she did enjoy seeing the same car go up and down the valley, watching them and how they moved. She wondered what was going on, but she had no idea. Eventually, the sun was all the way down, the stars began to shine, and the moon rose. Tanya moved safely back out into the darkness of the field, ate some more, and began to bed down for the evening. It had been a good day in the hidden valley for Tanya and her family. You've been listening to the Everyman Tales. Thank you for tuning in. We've been hearing stories of the hidden valley recently, and there are a lot more stories to tell. And who knows what kind of animal lives up the hidden valley in our next story. Feel free to follow me on my Facebook page. All you need to do is search for the Everyman Tales podcast. You can also listen to the podcast on, of course, Podbean, Audacity, the TuneIn Radio app, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Boomplay, and all kinds of other podcast apps. Thanks for listening. Feel free to share this podcast on whatever social media platform you appreciate the most. And don't forget to engage your imagination. Thanks again for tuning in to the Everyman Tales.